This Saturday, talkSPORT brings you live boxing. Natasha Jonas defends her IBF welterweight title against Mikaela Mayer in her hometown, Natasha's hometown, of course, of Liverpool. Our team in the night includes presenters Adam Catterall, Ali Drew, commentator John Rawling, and of course Spencer Oliver is there. Spencer Oliver is up in Liverpool this lunchtime, and he's alongside the man in charge of the entire event. He's the chief executive of Boxer, and he's Ben Shalom. Ben, good afternoon to you, mate. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm very, very well. How are you?
Good, thank you, Ben. Thanks for joining us. 2-minute rounds for the girls. Are there any regrets you won't be seeing 3-minute rounds in this event? Because it's my understanding both fighters wanted it, didn't they?
Look, I think if both fighters wanted it, it would be 3-minute rounds. So I think that tells you all you need to know. I'm delighted it's 2-minute rounds. I think we've seen a huge growth in women's boxing over the past 2 years. It's been phenomenal, to be honest. The sport is just so exciting. It delivers every time. The best are fighting the best, and it's all action. And that's what we're going to see on Saturday night. No one can afford to lose a round. And yeah, it's one of the best fights in women's boxing today.
What's wonderful about this, Ben, is that there's a lot of respect between the two girls going in to this. And there's a lot at stake, but as I say, there's a lot of mutual respect.
Yeah, there is. Look, Natasha Jonas, we've been working for her for 2 years now, and to see her now achieve everything that she deserved to. She was the first ever female fighter in the GB team, the first female ever to go to the Olympics and represent GB, then becomes the first ever British Boxer of the Year as a female, then becomes the first ever female black manager. She's just done it time and time again, and now she becomes the first woman to headline this arena in her hometown as a multi-weight world champion against an icon like Mikaela Mayer. You know, both of them have achieved so much in the sport, 2 Olympians, 2 females at the top of their game, and they're going to fight at a weight that neither of them have really fought before. So everything is on the line, and I think this division now, we've got Jessica McCaskill, you've got Sandy Ryan, you've got Lauren Price, who is behind me wanting to fight the winner, the Olympian, the gold medalist as well. So it's a huge, huge night on Saturday night.
I'm just listening to the background noise, Simon. At a time like this, you think, yeah, this is a big fight. Maybe 5 or so years ago, you wouldn't have thought it would be an event like this with 2 top girl fighters are attracting such a massive following and audience.
Well, you know, it tells you where these guys, Sky and Ben, have taken women's boxing, because it's their intellectual capital that have taken it to that level. And women's boxing now, it shouldn't actually be called women's boxing. It should just be called boxing, because the moment you make that translation, then you stop making it about genders. So I think it's great, and I think Natasha Jonas is the perfect embodiment of what you want to see your professional athletes look and sound like, because she is a credit to a sport, and I think she'll do a job on Saturday night.
Ben, if you can hear me, there's a lot of noise behind you. One other big fight on the horizon involves Chris Billam-Smith and Richard Riakporhe. They'll fight for the WBO Cruiserweight World title. You've managed to get these two in the ring at the same time. When does this happen?
Yeah, you know what? It's been on the cards for a long time, and Chris Billam-Smith, who became a world champion out of nowhere in that famous night in the stadium against Lawrence Okoli last year, he came through Master Night. But Richard Riakporhe is someone we've worked with a long time too, and so he's got to his mandatory position. The fight was always going to happen. It's a rematch as well. Richard Riakporhe is the only man to ever beat Chris Billam-Smith, and now he gets his chance to become a world champion. For me, it's got Fight of the Year written all over it. Chris Billam-Smith, every time he fights, he gives us a great fight. He only knows one way, and Richard Riakporhe, with his punch power now, has become one of the feared cruiserweight, feared men in the cruiserweight division. He is he's dangerous. He's someone that deserves it. He's someone that's just improved and improved. And if he can become a world champion, I can see him going up to heavyweight and being a real problem as well. But yeah, a domestic world title now, all signed, both parties agreed, and a date to come very soon.
Who wins that one, Simon, do you think?
Richard Riakporhe.
I can't hear.
Riakporhe. Ben, you've still got us. I hope you've still got us. Simon takes Riakporhe to win that fight. Yesterday, Ben, we had Paul Smith of the Smith boxing family on air with us, and he was talking about a union for the boxers. This is what Paul said.
I'm an ex-boxer. I know a lot about boxing. I've given my life to boxing. I've got 30 years of experience in boxing, and I consider myself an expert in boxing without sounding big-headed, but I don't know about unions or trade unions. I don't know about contracts as much as I should. We've got members of the TUC, we've got members of the PFA. We've been getting the right background checks on things, and the right people advising us on things, and We just want to give fighters a fair crack at the whip. We want to work with anyone that we can, all the promoters, the boxing board's control. You know, I'm sick to death of sitting there watching fighters getting their hands wrapped, and I'm the representative from the team, and the official doesn't know what he's looking for or she's looking for. And that for me is criminal. If you're in a sport, working in a sport, an official in a sport, you should know that sport inside out. That goes for football, that goes for boxing, that goes for any sport out there.
Ben Shalom, of course, you're a top promoter. But do you think it's time that the fighters in the industry are represented by a union of their own?
Look, I think regulation is something that's been talked about a lot in boxing, and we know the governance isn't there, and we know the regulation perhaps that we see in other sports isn't there. This is a growing sport. This is one of the fastest growing sports in the world. It's a global sport. For me, it's about having global governance, you know, not fragmented governance. It doesn't matter whether it's fighter representatives, it doesn't matter whether it's doping, it doesn't matter whether it's regulation. We need uniform governance, and so I do concur with Paul Smith that something has to be done, because, you know, this sport is now number 2, I would say, in many respects in this country to football, and it's still operating in a like it's a small sport in a very small time way, and we operate obviously at the top of the sport, but you can see it right throughout it. More regulation and more governance would be needed, and the fighters would benefit.
Ben, would you be happy for the suggestion to be mooted that in part the promoters should be funding the fighters' union?
I think so. I think one thing I've always said is that the British Boxing Board of Control are underfunded. They should be getting more funding. All their funding comes from promoter payouts. And so I think the TV companies need to get together. I think the broadcasting companies need to get together, and the British board
and
needs
fund
to be
a trade. Are you sure about that, Ben? And fund a trade union. And fund a trade union. You'd be happy, as a promoter, giving proportions of your income to fund a trade union when most trade unions around the world are funded by its members?
In every other sport, revenue that is generated in the sport goes into trade unions, goes into governance. It should be no different in boxing. You know, you see it now where the British Boxing Board can hardly move left or right or make a decision without having a problem. And so the trade union is maybe a separate part of that or part of that, but 100% the revenue from the sport needs to go into the governance.
Ben, it would be remiss of me not to mention the Sunday Times article from last weekend, which featured the sports agent who was jailed over the Pakistan cricket spot fixing scandal, who's become a significant figure in boxing and is working with a promoter who has the exclusive contract to deliver shows for Sky Sports. And that's you. Mazhar Majid has managed to establish himself in a new sport, the sport of boxing, and now acts as an advisor to fighters, we were told, with direct links to Boxer, co-funded and run by Ben Shalom. Ben, now you've had a few days and the dust has settled from that article. What would you say to what was said and what was alleged in the reporting in that article?
Look, yeah, they're clearly looking to Mazhar Majid, and I think the point that we'd like to make is Mazhar Majid has been involved in boxing long before we even existed. We deal with fighters, we deal with their representatives, we deal with cousins, brothers. I have 25 fighters. We have all sorts of representatives that we have to get fights done with. And so for me, it's a nonsense story. And have we dealt with Mazhar Majid? Of course. He represents fighters that we need to promote or we make fights with. And so, as I say, we're not the first promoter, we're not the last promoter. And I think, again, it's a promoter does not regulate the sport. A promoter works with fighters. A promoter works with fighters' representative. I think everyone understands that.
So you are confirming that, yes, you do work with this guy and you'll continue to work with him?
If he represents a fighter, and a fighter instructs us that they are represented by him or his company rather, then of course we will work with that company where that fighter is promoted by us. I think that's the same with, as I say, all 25 fighters that we have. I think Mazhar Majid or his company maybe represents one of those 25 fighters, and that's a fighter's decision. It's a fighter's decision that we respect, and we work with the representatives that they instruct.
Would you like to see, Ben, better governance over who can represent fighters from people like the British Boxing Board of Control to suggest that certain people might be excluded from representing fighters, so people like yourself or Eddie or Frank that have probably all at one time dealt with this fella wouldn't have to deal with him in the future if he wasn't regulated properly by the industry?
Look, possibly, but I have to be really careful who I think is fit and proper and who I think is not. The sport has a long history with poor regulation and poor governance, so I agree there needs to be some sort of fit and proper persons test within the sport, without a doubt. If that extends to representatives of fighters, then great. But as you know, in football, you know, a footballer might be represented by a brother or a cousin, or it's very hard to decide who a fighter's going to be represented by. But I think across the sport, fit and proper persons tests, if they can be implemented, would obviously do a world of good.